No stone at the seabird. Good evening. Welcome back. Tonight we are in Stillwater Cove, Maine, where the tide comes in, and so do the secrets. Before we begin, if you enjoy what we do here, please like the video and subscribe. Tell us in the comments where you are and what time it is. Now, get comfortable. Turn off the lights, and let's find out what happened. Danny Coyle kept a list of everyone who owed him money. He kept it in his head, not on paper, and he updated it every Sunday morning at Harlow's Diner while Iris refilled his coffee. That list was longer than most people knew. So was the list of people who wanted him gone. Tonight, we are in Stillwater Cove at the start of lobster season, when the harbor smells of diesel and the town holds its breath for the first haul. Nora Alcott is sitting in her parked cruiser at the edge of the dock, watching a man in a gray coat walk toward the water. And she has no idea yet that she is about to spend the next 7 days learning the difference between a debt and a secret. Chapter 1. The Debt List. Nora Alcott woke at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of Beckett knocking something off the kitchen counter. She did not open her eyes immediately. She lay still for a moment, listening. The something turned out to be a ceramic mug that had been empty since the night before. It hit the linoleum and did not break. Beckett sat beside the mug and looked at her as if the event required her attention. "Good morning," Nora said. Beckett blinked once, slowly. The cottage was cold. May in Stillwater Cove meant fog most mornings and a damp that seeped through the walls of her late aunt's house no matter how high she turned the thermostat. Nora pushed the blanket aside and stood up. Her feet touched the floor, and the floor was cold, and she made a mental note to buy slippers. She had been making that mental note for 3 winters. She dressed in the dark. The uniform was second nature now. Navy blue, deputy's patch on the shoulder, badge clipped to the belt. She had worn some version of it for nearly 20 years, first in Boston and now here. The Boston version had been heavier. The fabric had been different, so had the weight behind it. In the kitchen, she found Beckett had moved from the mug to the copy of the tide chart she had left on the table. He was sitting on it, not lying down, sitting. His posture suggested that the tide chart had been placed there specifically for him. "That's from the harbor master," Nora said. Beckett did not move. She made coffee instead. The machine was old and slow. And she used the time to look out the window at the harbor. The water was gray and flat. A few boats were already moving, lobster boats, heading out before first light to check the traps they had set the day before. She counted 4 of them. The season had opened 2 weeks ago, and the fleet was still finding its rhythm. Her phone buzzed, Sheriff Roy Gannett, which meant he was either calling to delegate something or to tell her he would be late. She answered. "Morning." Roy. "Morning." He sounded like he was already eating something. "You seen the weather report? Fog burns off by 9. "Not that. The other thing. The harbor report." Nora waited. Gannett had a habit of expecting her to fill silences, and she had a habit of not doing it. "Cal Finney filed a note last night," Gannett said. "Someone left the dock gate open after dark. Not locked, just open. That's unusual." "That's what I said. Cal said he's never seen it happen in 40 years. Danny Coyle usually locks it. He's the last one out most nights." Nora looked at the tide chart under Beckett's weight. Danny Coyle. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. Danny was 38, third-generation lobsterman, and he had a reputation for 2 things: catching more lobsters than anyone else in the cove and lending money to people who could not pay him back. The lending was not charity. Danny charged interest, and he collected. "Did Cal talk to Danny?" Nora asked. Said he tried. Danny didn't answer his phone. Cal figured he was already out on the water. Nora poured her coffee into a travel mug. I'll swing by the dock on my way in. You do that. Gannett's voice shifted, which meant he was about to ask for something. And when you get to the station, we need to talk about the budget meeting. Selectmen want to know why we're running over on vehicle maintenance. I'll be there by 7. Good. And Nora. She waited. The gate thing is probably nothing, but Cal doesn't usually call about nothing. He hung up. Nora looked at Beckett. Beckett was still sitting on the tide chart. She pulled it out from under him. And he allowed this with the expression of someone who had decided to be generous. The drive into town took 6 minutes. The cottage was half a mile from the harbor on a road that curved along the bluffs before dropping down to Main Street. The fog was thick near the water, thin near the trees, and Nora drove with her high beams off because the reflection off the mist made it worse. The dock was quiet when she arrived. The gate was closed now. Someone had locked it after Cal found it open, but she could see where the lock had been left dangling. She parked the cruiser and walked to the edge of the pier. Cal Finney was already there. He was 72 years old, thin as a rail, and he moved like a man who had spent his entire life on surfaces that rocked. He was standing at the end of the dock with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the water. "Deputy," he said. "Cal, Roy said you had a late night. Gate was open at 10:30 when I came down to check the lines. Danny's truck was still in the lot. His boat was gone. I locked up and figured he'd forgotten." But Cal turned to look at her. His face was lined and slow to change expression, but she had known him long enough to read the hesitation. Danny doesn't forget. He's been locking that gate every night for 15 years. His father before him. His grandfather before that. "Did you see anyone else around, Duff? Heard a boat start up around 4? Could have been Danny. Could have been someone else." Nora looked at the lot. Danny's truck was still there, an old Ford with rust along the wheel wells and a lobster buoy hanging from the rear-view mirror. The parking lot faced the Seabird Inn, a white clapboard building with 12 rooms and a wraparound porch that looked out over the water. "I'll check with Magnus," she said. "See if Danny had a room." "Danny doesn't stay at the inn," Cal said. "He's got a house on the hill. Then what's his truck doing here?" Cal didn't answer. He didn't need to. The question hung in the damp air like the fog, and Nora felt the first small shift in her chest, the one that told her a routine morning was about to become something else. She walked back to her cruiser and called the inn. Magnus Torkel answered on the second ring. His voice was formal, measured. The accent, Norwegian softened by 30 years in Maine. "Seabird Inn. Magnus, it's Deputy Alcott. Is Danny Coyle a guest?" A pause. Magnus was a man who considered his words before he spoke, and Nora had learned to wait. "No," he said. "He is not. But his truck has been in my lot since last night, and I was about to call you." "What?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Because I found something in the parking lot at 5:30 this morning when I went out to put the recycling bins on the curb." Nora's hand tightened on the phone. "What did you find?" Magnus's voice did not change. He was a man who had seen tourists do foolish things for 30 years, and very little surprised him anymore. But something in the quality of his silence told Nora that this was different. "You should come see for yourself, Deputy." She hung up and drove the 300 feet from the dock to the inn's parking lot. The fog had begun to lift just barely, and the sun was a pale smear behind the clouds. The lot was gravel and puddled, and in the center of it, near the back corner where the recycling bin stood, a shape was covered by a blue tarp that Magnus must have pulled from the inn's supply closet. Nora got out of the cruiser, She did not run, she walked. And as she walked, she counted her breaths and felt her pulse settle into the rhythm she had learned in Boston. The rhythm that came before she knew what she was going to see. Magnus stood by the tarp. He was wearing a cardigan and slippers. His hands were in his pockets. "I didn't move anything," he said. Nora knelt and lifted the corner of the tarp. Danny Coyle's face was pale and still. His eyes were closed. His mouth was slightly open, as if he had been about to say something when whatever happened, happened. There was blood on the gravel beneath his head, dark and tacky. And when Nora lifted the tarp higher, she saw the wound. Blunt force, back of the skull. Something heavy and metal, swung with intent. She let the tarp fall back into place and stood up. "Did you see anyone leave the lot this morning?" she asked. Magnus shook his head. "I was inside until 5. The first boat went out at 4:17. I heard the engine, but I didn't look." "How do you know the time?" "I looked at my watch when I heard it. I was already awake. I'm a light sleeper." Nora pulled out her phone and called Gannett. He answered on the first ring, which meant he was either in the car or still at home pretending to be on his way. "Roy, it's not the gate. What is it?" "Danny Coyle is dead in the Seabird Inn parking lot. Blunt force trauma. Someone killed him and left him here." A long silence. When Gannett spoke again, his voice had lost its morning ease. "I'll be there in 10. Nora hung up and looked at the harbor. The fog was burning off now, and she could see the boats coming back in the first haul of the day. Their traps full or not. Their captains unaware that the man who had been the last one on the water the night before was lying under a tarp in a parking lot with a hole in his skull. She took out her notebook and wrote the time. 5:50 in the morning. Then she wrote Danny Coyle's name and underlined it twice. Someone had signed him out of the harbor log at 4:17. His boat had left at 4:17, but his truck was still here, and his body was here, and the dock gate had been left open. Somewhere in the cove, someone knew what had happened between 4:17 and 5:30. Nora looked at Magnus. "I'm going to need the guest list for the last 3 days." Magnus nodded once. "I'll have it for you before Gannett arrives." He walked back toward the inn, his slippers silent on the gravel. And Nora stood alone in the parking lot with the body of a man who had lent money to half the fishing fleet and collected from all of them. She wrote one more thing in her notebook. Find the boat, find the killer. Then she waited. Chapter 2. The boots were dry. The crime scene took 3 hours to process. Gannett arrived at 6, took one look at the body under the tarp, and went to stand by his car with a cup of coffee he had brought from home. He did not offer Nora any. He also did not offer to help. The state forensics team came down from Rockland at 8. They were 2 people, a woman named Donnelly, who had been doing the job for 20 years, and a man named Park, who looked young enough to be her grandson. Donnelly knelt beside Danny Coyle's body and did not speak for a full minute. When she looked up, her expression was neutral. "He's been here since at least midnight," she said. "I'll know more after we get him on the table." "Cause of death?" Nora asked. "Blunt force. Like you said. 1 blow. Posterior skull. The object was cylindrical and heavy. Could be a mooring pin, like Magnus suggested. Could be a piece of pipe. I'll need to match the fracture pattern." Nora wrote it down. "Anything else?" Donnelly tilted Danny's head slightly to the side, using a gloved hand to lift the collar of his jacket. "His clothes are damp. Not wet. Damp. Like he'd been outside in the fog for a while before he was moved." Moved? Donnelly pointed to Danny's boots. "These are deck boots. They're dry on the bottom. Not a scuff mark. Not a trace of gravel dust. If he walked across this parking lot, His boots would have picked up some of this crushed stone. They didn't. Nora looked at the gravel. It was gray and sharp-edged, the kind that stuck to wet soles and left marks on pavement. So he was carried, she said. Or dragged, but there's no drag marks. Whoever put him here carried him, and they did it carefully enough that his boots didn't touch the ground until they set him down exactly where we found him. Nora looked at the position of the body. Danny was lying flat on his back, arms at his sides, legs straight. It looked deliberate. It looked like someone had arranged him. He was killed somewhere else. Nora said. Donnelly nodded. That's my working theory. No blood pool under the head. Not enough for a wound that size. He bled out wherever he was hit. Then someone brought him here. The bleeding had stopped by the time he was placed. Nora stood up and walked the perimeter of the lot. The inn faced the harbor, and the parking lot ran along the side of the building. There were 2 ways in the main entrance from the road and a back gate that led to the dock. The back gate was locked when Cal Finney arrived at 10:30 the night before. He confirmed that. So whoever carried Danny into the lot either came through the main entrance or had a key to the back gate. She looked at the dock. The gate was visible from where she stood, 50 yards away. If someone carried a body across that distance in the dark, they would have needed to be strong, familiar with the route, and confident that no one was watching. She wrote that down. 2. Gannett appeared at her elbow. His coffee was gone, and he had a crumb on his chin that he did not seem to notice. Donnelly said he was moved. Nora said, I heard that means the murder happened somewhere else. Somewhere with a floor that could be cleaned. Somewhere private. Gannett looked at the inn, then at the dock, then at the row of houses along the bluff. That narrows it down to about 400 buildings in town. It narrows it to whoever had access to a boat. Gannett frowned. Why a boat? Danny's boat left the dock at 4:17. The automated log says so. But his body was here, not on the water. So either someone else took his boat out or the log is wrong. The log is automated. The log can be fooled. Nora walked toward the dock, and Gannett followed. Which was unusual. He usually delegated and retreated. The fact that he was still with her meant he was either curious or worried about the selectmen's reaction to a murder at the start of lobster season. Cal Finney was still at the dock. He was sitting on a wooden bench near the gate, his hands folded in his lap, watching the forensics team with the patient expression of a man who had seen everything twice. Cal, Nora said, the automated log. Is it possible to sign out without actually taking the boat? Cal looked at her for a long moment. You sign the sheet. The system records the time you write down. It doesn't check if the boat actually leaves. So someone could sign Danny's name and the system would accept it? The signature is what matters. If it looks like his, the log takes it. Nora turned to Gannett. I need to see that log. Gannett shrugged. It's in the harbormaster's office. I'll get you the key. He walked away, and Nora sat down on the bench next to Cal. The wood was wet with fog, and she felt the damp seep through her uniform pants. You keep your own records? She said. Handwritten? Cal nodded. Always have. The automated system is fine for tourists, but I like my own eyes on things. What did your eyes see last night? Cal took a breath. He did not speak for several seconds. And Nora did not push. She had learned long ago that Cal Finney talked when he was ready and not before. Danny came down around 4 in the morning, he said finally. I saw him drive in, parked in the lot, same as always, walked down to the dock. He had his gear with him. Did he say anything? Not to me. I was up by the bait shed. He didn't see me, but I watched him untie his lines and start the engine. He was alone. What time was that, 4:10? I looked at my watch because I wanted to see if he'd beat his own record. He usually takes the first haul of the day. The season just started, so everyone's competitive. Nora wrote it down. What happened after that? His engine was running for a few minutes. Then it cut out. I figured he was having trouble with the fuel line. Happens sometimes. But then I saw someone else on the dock. Nora stopped writing. Who couldn't see the face. It was dark, and the fog was thick. But they were wearing a gray coat, medium height, walked with a slight limp. Did they get on the boat? I don't know. I turned away for a minute to answer my phone. My daughter calls every morning at 4:15. She lives in Portland, and she worries. Cal paused. When I looked back, the engine was running again, and the boat was pulling away from the dock. I assumed Danny was at the helm. But you didn't see him? No, I didn't see him. Nora looked at the harbor. The tide was coming in, and the water was slate gray with white caps near the mouth of the cove. Danny's boat was still out there somewhere. Or it wasn't. She needed to find it. What about the gate? She asked. I locked it at 10:30 when I came back at 11 to check on something. It was still locked. When I came down this morning, it was open. So someone unlocked it between 11 and 4, or picked the lock. But there's no sign of that. The lock works fine. I checked it myself. Nora stood up. Thank you, Cal. I'll need a copy of your handwritten log. It's in the bait shed, top drawer. Help yourself. She walked back toward the inn. Gannett was waiting by the cruiser with a key in his hand and a look on his face that she recognized. He had something to say that he did not want to say. The harbor master's office is open, he said. You don't need the key. Then why do you have one? Because I wanted to talk to you before you went in there. Nora waited. The selectmen are going to hear about this by noon, Gannett said. They're going to want it handled quietly. Lobster season is the town's bread and butter. If people think there's a killer on the loose, the tourists won't come, and the fishermen won't talk. Roy, a man is dead. I know that. I'm not saying don't investigate. I'm saying don't make a scene. Nora looked at him for a long moment. She wanted to say something sharp, something about priorities and decency and the fact that Danny Coyle had been placed in a parking lot like a piece of discarded equipment. She did not say any of it. I'll find out what happened, she said. And when I do, I'll tell the selectmen whatever I think they need to know. Gannett's jaw tightened. He was not used to being pushed back, and he did not like it. But he also did not have the authority to overrule her, not on a murder case, and they both knew it. Just keep it low, he said. That's all I'm asking. He walked back to his car and drove away, and Nora stood alone in the parking lot with the key in her hand and the weight of the morning pressing down on her shoulders. She walked to the harbor master's office. The log was on the desk, open to the previous day's entries. The automated system had printed a clean record of every boat that left the dock between midnight and 5 in the morning. Danny Coyle's name was there. Line 17, time 4:17. The signature was his. Nora compared it to a receipt from Harlow's Diner that she had in her glove box Danny had signed for a to-go order 2 weeks ago. The loops matched. The slant matched. The pressure of the pen looked the same. But something felt wrong. She took out her phone and photographed the signature. Then she photographed Cal's handwritten log, which had Danny still on the dock at 4:45, talking to someone in a gray coat. The automated log said Danny was already gone by then. Cal's eyes said he was still there. Nora closed her notebook and sat back in the harbor master's chair. The office smelled of coffee and low tide, same as the sheriff's station, same as her own clothes after a morning on the water. She looked at the two logs side by side on her phone screen and felt the first real shape of the case begin to form. Someone had signed Danny out at 4:17. Someone who had access to his signature. Someone who wanted the boat to leave without him. And someone in a gray coat had been on the dock at 4:45 talking to a man who was supposed to be already at sea. Nora wrote 3 names in her notebook. The boat, the gray coat, the log. She underlined each one twice. Then she locked the harbor master's office, walked back to her cruiser, and drove to Harlow's diner. It was 9 in the morning. She had not eaten since the night before, and Iris Harlow would have heard everything already. What Iris had to say might be the difference between finding Danny Coyle's killer and losing him to the tide. Chapter 3. 3 names on the board. Harlow's diner was half full at 9 in the morning, which was unusual for a Tuesday after the start of lobster season. Most fishermen were either on the water or sleeping. But news traveled fast in Stillwater Cove, and Danny Coyle's body had been under a tarp for 3 hours. That was plenty of time for the rumor mill to grind. Iris Harlow stood behind the counter with a coffee pot in one hand and a dish towel in the other. She was 52 years old, broad-shouldered, and she moved through the diner like a ship through calm water, steady, unhurried, aware of everything around her. Her hair was gray and pulled back in a clip. Her apron had a stain on the front that looked like raspberry jam. She saw Nora walk in and did not wave. She did not smile. She simply filled a mug and set it on the counter at Nora's usual spot, the corner booth near the window. Nora slid into the booth and wrapped her hands around the mug. The ceramic was warm, the coffee was black, and the first sip was exactly what she needed. Iris came over with a plate. Eggs, toast, hash browns. Nora had not ordered it. "You look like you haven't eaten since yesterday," Iris said. "I haven't." "Then eat." Nora picked up her fork. The eggs were good. The toast was buttered. She ate for a full minute before she spoke. "You heard about Danny?" Iris sat down across from her, which was not something she usually did during the breakfast rush. But the rush was not happening. People were eating slowly, leaning toward each other, lowering their voices when they said certain names. "I heard," Iris said. "Magnus called me at 6. He was shaken up. You don't see Magnus shaken up often." "Did he say anything else?" "He said the body was in his parking lot. He said you were there. He said Danny's boots were dry." Nora put down her fork. "That's specific." Iris repeated what she heard. She does not edit. She does not embellish. She delivers. "The boots being dry means he was carried." Iris nodded. "That's what people are saying. That and the boat. The boat left without him." Nora looked out the window. The harbor was visible from the booth, just past the gas station and the hardware store. She could see the dock, the gate, the parking lot where she had spent the morning. "Who have you heard talking?" Nora asked. Iris leaned back. Her eyes moved across the room, cataloging faces, weighing loyalties. "Ray Gillis was in here at 6:30. He looked bad, pale, jumpy, ordered coffee and didn't drink it, left after 10 minutes. Ray owes Danny money. $11,000. Everyone knows. Danny talked about it openly. Said Ray had 60 days, and the 60 days were up last Thursday." Nora wrote it down. "Who else?" "Old Pete Coyle came in at 7, sat at the counter, ate a full breakfast, which he never does. Usually he just has coffee and a roll. This morning he had eggs, bacon, toast, and a side of sausage. Ate every bite. Didn't say a word to anyone. Pete and Danny haven't spoken in 18 months. That's what Pete says. But I've seen them together. Not lately, but I've seen them." Iris paused. "There's something else." Nora waited. "Marta Chen." She came in at 8, sat in the back, didn't order anything, just sat there. The new girl works the kitchen sometimes. She's been here 14 months. She's not new anymore, but she's still not from here. Iris leaned forward. She and Danny had an argument behind the diner 2 nights ago. I didn't see it, but Cal did. He was walking by on his way home. He said Danny was angry, really angry, and Marta was crying. Did Cal hear what they were arguing about? No, he didn't want to get involved. But he said Danny pointed at her and said something like, "No one will believe you." Then he walked away. Nora wrote the name Marta Chen and underlined it. What do you know about her? Iris shrugged. She showed up 14 months ago from Providence, got the job at the diner because I needed help and she had experience. She's quiet, keeps to herself, rents a room above the hardware store. No visitors, no calls that anyone's noticed. Has she had any contact with Danny before now? If she did, I didn't see it, and I see everything. Nora finished her eggs and pushed the plate aside. The coffee was still warm, and she drank it while she thought. 3 names, she said. Ray Gillis, Pete Coyle, Marta Chen. 3 people who wanted something from Danny, Iris said. Or wanted him gone. Nora looked at her. You think one of them killed him? I think someone killed him, and I think whoever did it knew the harbor, knew the gate, and knew how to sign Danny's name well enough to fool an automated log. Iris stood up. The breakfast rush was starting to build, and she had customers to serve. But before she walked away, she put a hand on Nora's shoulder. Be careful, she said. Danny Coyle wasn't a good man, but he was a Coyle. And the Coyles have been in this town for 100 years. There are people who will close ranks around that name, no matter what he did. Nora nodded. Iris walked back to the counter, and Nora sat alone in the booth for another 10 minutes, writing and thinking. Ray Gillis owed money. That was a motive. But it was an obvious motive, and obvious motives often led nowhere. Pete Coyle had a grudge. A family dispute over a boat deed. That was also obvious. Marta Chen was a mystery. She had no visible connection to Danny, no obvious motive. But she had argued with him 2 days before he died, and Danny had said something strange. No one will believe you. Believe what? What did Marta know that Danny did not want her to tell? Nora paid her tab and left the diner. The fog had burned off completely, and the sun was high enough to cast shadows. She walked to her cruiser and called the station. Gannett answered on the second ring. You got something? 3 suspects. Nora said, I need backgrounds. Ray Gillis, Pete Coyle, and Marta Chen. Chen? The diner girl? She argued with Danny 2 days ago. Cal Finney saw it. Gannett paused. I'll pull what I can, but the state system is slow today. Might take a few hours. Call me when you have something. She hung up and sat in the cruiser for a moment, looking at the harbor. Danny's boat was still missing. Someone had taken it out at 4:17, signed his name, and disappeared into the dark. The boat could be anywhere by now, tied up at another dock, scuttled in deep water, or sitting empty on a mooring somewhere along the coast. She needed to find it. But she needed to find the person who signed the log first. Nora started the engine and drove toward the dock. Cal Finney would still be there. And Cal Finney had mentioned something else that morning, something about a limp. The person in the gray coat had walked with a slight limp. She pulled into the dock lot and parked next to the bait shed. Cal was inside, sorting traps, his back to the door. Cal, she said. He turned around. His face was tired. The gray coat, Nora said. The person you saw on the dock with Danny. You said they walked with a limp. Cal nodded. Was it a bad limp? Something you'd notice? just a slight one, like they'd pulled a muscle, or like they were favoring one leg. Old injury or new? Cal thought about it. Hard to say, but they moved like someone who knew the dock, didn't hesitate, didn't stumble, just walked a little uneven. Nora wrote it down. Did you see them leave? No. I turned away to answer the phone. When I looked back, the boat was gone, and the dock was empty. So whoever it was either got on the boat or walked away while you weren't looking. Cal nodded again. I've been thinking about that all morning, wondering if I should have paid more attention, if I should have walked down there instead of answering the phone. You couldn't have known. Maybe not, but now a man is dead, and I'm the only one who saw the person who might have killed him. Nora put her notebook away. You're not the only one. Cal, someone else saw something. They just don't know it yet. She left the bait shed and walked to the edge of the dock. The water was calm now, the tide nearly high. She could see the mooring lines where Danny's boat had been tied. On the wooden piling near the cleat, there was a small mark, a scrape, fresh enough that the wood was still pale. Nora knelt to look at it. The scrape was the same width as a mooring pin. She took a photograph with her phone. Then she stood up and looked at the parking lot. 50 yards away. The distance was not long. A strong person could carry a body that far, but they would have needed to do it without being seen, and they would have needed to know that the in-security camera was pointed at the front door, not the back lot. Nora made a note to ask Magnus about the camera. Then she walked back to her cruiser, sat in the driver's seat, and looked at her notebook. 3 names. 3 people with reasons to want Danny Coyle gone. Ray Gillis, Pete Coyle, Marta Chen. She would talk to all of them before the day was over, and by the time she finished, she would know which one had a limp. Chapter 4. What the harbor keeps. The afternoon light had a greenish cast by the time Nora finished her second cup of coffee and left the diner. She drove the short distance to the dock and parked near the harbor master's office. The building was small, gray, and drafty, same as the sheriff's station. She had the key in her pocket, but she did not need it. The door was unlocked. Inside, she sat at the desk and opened the automated log again. Danny's signature stared up at her, neat and familiar. She had seen it a dozen times on receipts, on forms, on the back of photographs at the station. The loops were consistent. The slant was the same. But something about it bothered her. She pulled out her phone and compared the signature to the photograph she had taken of Danny's receipt from the diner. The letters matched. The pressure looked the same. She could not find a single difference. And yet, Nora closed the log and leaned back in the chair. The harbor master's office smelled of paper and salt and something else, something sweet, like the remnants of a cigarette smoked hours ago. She looked around. The ashtray on the desk was clean. The windows were closed. The smell was faint, almost gone. She made a note. Check if Danny smoked. Then she locked the office and walked back to her cruiser. Her phone buzzed. Gannett. I've got something on Marta Chen, he said. Not much. She worked at a diner in Providence before she came here. No criminal record, no traffic violations. But there's a note in the file from a social worker in Rhode Island. Something about a family dispute. The details are sealed. Sealed how? Court order. I can request access, but it'll take a week. Nora frowned. What about Ray Gillis? Ray's clean on paper, but his boat insurance lapsed 3 weeks ago, and the bank sent him a notice of default on his loan. He's got 60 days to pay or they take the boat. And Pete Coyle? Pete's got a temper. 3 complaints from neighbors about noise and threats, all from the past 2 years. Nothing stuck, no charges filed. Nora wrote it all down. Thanks, Roy. Don't thank me yet. The selectmen called again. They want a briefing by 5. I told them you'd handle it. She hung up before she could say something she would regret. The next interview took her to Ray Gillis's house. It was a small cape on the south end of town, paint peeling, gutters sagging, a boat trailer in the driveway, with no boat on it. The door opened before she knocked. Ray looked bad. His face was gray, his eyes were red, and his hands were shaking. He was 50 years old, but looked 60. "Deputy," he said. "Mr. Gillis, I need to ask you some questions about Danny Coyle." Ray stepped back and let her in. The house smelled of old food and loneliness. Dishes were stacked in the sink. Newspapers were piled on the table. "When was the last time you saw Danny?" Nora asked. Ray sat down on the couch. He did not offer her a seat. "Yesterday, at the dock. He was getting his boat ready." "Did you talk to him?" "He talked to me. Said my 60 days were up and he wanted his money by Friday or he'd take my boat." Ray's voice cracked on the last word. Nora watched his hands. They were still shaking. "Were you at the dock last night?" Ray looked at the floor. "No." "Mr. Gillis?" "I said no." Nora waited. The silence stretched. Ray's jaw tightened, and his breathing changed faster, shallower. "I wasn't at the dock," he said again. "I was home, alone, watching television." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No." He looked up. His eyes were wet. "Look, I owed Danny money. Everyone knows that. But I didn't kill him. I couldn't. I don't have it in me." Nora studied his face. He was telling the truth about not killing Danny. She was almost certain. But he was lying about something else. "Where were you last night, Ray?" He did not answer. His hands stopped shaking. They went still, pressed flat against his knees. And Nora knew then that whatever he was hiding was not murder. It was something else. Something smaller and more selfish. She stood up. "I'll be back, Mr. Gillis. If you remember anything about last night, call me." She left her card on the table and walked out. The afternoon was warming up, and the harbor was busy now, boats coming and going. Tourists walking the dock, children throwing breadcrumbs to the gulls. Nora stood at the railing near the gate and looked out at the water. Pete Coyle was next. His house was on the bluff, a 2-story Victorian with a view of the harbor and a garden that had gone to seed. Pete was on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair with a glass of lemonade in his hand. He did not stand when she walked up the steps. "Deputy Alcott," he said, "I figured you'd be by." "Mr. Coyle, I need to ask you about Danny." Pete took a sip of his lemonade. His face was weathered and lined, his hands gnarled from decades of hauling traps. "Danny was my brother's boy, my nephew. I loved him once. And now?" "Now he's dead. And I'm not sorry." Nora sat down in the chair next to him. The wood creaked under her weight. "Why not?" Pete stared at the harbor. "Because Danny took everything from me. The boat, the deed, my father's legacy. He lied to the lawyers, forged my signature on the transfer papers, and left me with nothing." "Do you have proof?" "The proof is in a safe deposit box at the bank in Rockland. I've been building a case for 3 years. Legal, not violent." "Did you see Danny yesterday?" "I saw him at the dock. He was getting his boat ready. I didn't talk to him." "What about last night?" Pete turned to look at her. His eyes were clear and steady. "I was here, alone, reading." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No, but I didn't kill him. Deputy, I wanted him to face a judge, not a coffin." Nora believed him. She did not know why yet, but she believed him. There was something in the way he said the word coffin flat, final, without satisfaction. "Thank you, Mr. Coyle," I'll let you know if I have more questions." She stood up and walked back to her cruiser. The sun was lower now, the shadows longer. She had one more interview before the selectmen's briefing. Marta Chen lived above the hardware store on Main Street. The stairs were narrow and steep, and the door at the top was painted a faded blue. Nora knocked. Marta opened the door after a long moment. She was 29, slender, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that looked like they had not slept. She was wearing a diner apron over a sweater, as if she had come home and forgotten to take it off. "Deputy Alcott," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Miss Chen, I need to ask you about Danny Coyle." Marta stepped back. The apartment was small but clean. A single bed, a table, a hot plate, a bookshelf filled with paperbacks. She sat on the edge of the bed and folded her hands in her lap. "Cal Finney saw you arguing with Danny behind the diner 2 nights ago," Nora said. "What was that about?" Marta was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He was my brother." Nora did not react. She waited. "Same father, different mothers. My mother raised me alone in Providence. I didn't know about Danny until our father died and the will was read. He left everything to Danny. Everything. The house, the boat, the savings. I got nothing." Marta's hands were white-knuckled. "I came here to find him, to ask him why, to see if he would help me. I didn't want money. I just wanted, I don't know, acknowledgement." "And what did Danny say?" "He said no one would believe me. He said I was a stranger from the city with a fake story. He said if I tried to prove anything, he would ruin me." Marta looked up. Her eyes were dry, but her voice was raw. "I didn't kill him, Deputy. I wanted him to admit I existed. That's all." Nora studied her face. The grief was real. The anger was real. But the guilt. "Where were you last night?" Nora asked. "Here, alone. I went to bed at 9 and woke up to the news." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No, I live alone." Nora stood up. "Thank you. Ms. Chen, don't leave town." Marta nodded. Her hands were still folded in her lap, still white-knuckled. Nora walked down the stairs and stood on the sidewalk outside the hardware store. The sun was setting, and the street lights were beginning to glow. She had interviewed 3 people. All of them had motive. All of them had secrets. None of them had an alibi. And somewhere out there, Danny Coyle's boat was still missing. She drove back to the station. Gannett was gone for the day. Which was fine. She did not want to brief him yet. She wanted to think. She sat at her desk and opened her notebook. Ray Gillis owed money. He was lying about something, but his lies felt like fear, not violence. Pete Coyle had a legal case. He wanted justice, not revenge. Marta Chen was Danny's half-sister. She had been erased from the family record. She had come looking for recognition and found rejection. None of them had a limp. Nora closed her notebook and rubbed her eyes. The gray coat, the limp, the signature, the boat. She was missing something. Something small. Something right in front of her. The station was dark and quiet. The only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator in the break room and the distant cry of gulls from the harbor. Nora locked up and drove home. The cottage was cold and dark. Beckett was on the kitchen table, sitting on the tide chart she had left there that morning. He did not acknowledge her arrival. She made tea and sat in the armchair by the window. Beckett jumped down from the table and walked across the floor. He did not jump into her lap. He sat on the rug and stared at the door. Nora drank her tea and thought about limps. The person Cal Finney saw had walked unevenly. Not a bad limp, Just a slight one, like they were favoring one leg. She thought about the interviews. Ray had walked normally, Pete had walked normally, Marta had walked normally. But someone else had been on that dock, someone who was not on her list yet. Nora finished her tea and went to bed. Beckett did not follow. He stayed on the rug, staring at the door, as if he knew something she did not. She fell asleep with the taste of coffee on her tongue and the image of a gray coat behind her eyes. In the morning she would find the boat, and when she found the boat, she would find the killer. Chapter 5. The Boat. Nora woke before dawn. The cottage was still cold, and Beckett was still on the rug, now curled into a tight circle with his tail over his nose. She stepped over him on her way to the kitchen and started the coffee maker. Her notebook was on the counter where she had left it. She opened it to the page with the 3 names and read them again. Ray Gillis, Pete Coyle, Marta Chen. None of them had a limp. None of them had an alibi. All of them had secrets. She poured her coffee into the travel mug and walked outside. The harbor was quiet at 5 in the morning. The fog was back, thicker than the day before, and the water was invisible from the parking lot. Nora parked near the dock and walked to the harbor master's office. The automated log was still on the desk. She opened it to the previous day's entries and ran her finger down the list of boats that had left between midnight and 5. Danny's name was there. Line 17. Time 4:17. The signature was still wrong. She knew it now. She could feel it in her gut, even if she could not prove it yet. She took a photograph of the signature with her phone and compared it to the photograph of Danny's receipt from the diner. Side by side, they looked identical. But when she zoomed in on the first stroke of the letter D, something caught her eye. The pressure was heavier on the receipt. The pressure on the log was lighter at the start of the stroke and heavier at the end. It was the kind of difference a forger might make if they were tracing an existing signature starting too carefully, then pressing harder as they gained confidence. Nora set her phone down and closed her eyes. Someone had traced Danny's signature. Someone who had access to a document with his signature on it. Someone who knew the automated system well enough to know that the log would accept a trace signature without question. She opened her eyes and looked at the window. The fog was starting to lift, just barely, and she could see the silhouette of the dock against the gray water. Cal Finney's handwritten log was in the bait shed. She walked over and let herself in. The log was on the top drawer, exactly where Cal had said it would be. She opened it to the previous day's entries and read his notes. 4:10 a.m. Danny drives in, parks in lot, walks to dock. 4:15 a.m. Danny unties lines, starts engine. 4:17 a.m. Engine cuts out. Danny gets out of boat, stands on dock. 4:20 a.m. Second person arrives, gray coat, medium height, walks with slight limp. 4:25 a.m. Danny and gray coat talking, cannot hear words. 4:45 a.m. Danny and gray coat still talking. Danny is late for tide. 4:50 a.m. I turn away to answer phone. Daughter calls. 4:52 a.m. I look back. Boat is leaving dock. Danny not visible. Gray coat not visible. 5:00 a.m. I lock gate and go home. Nora read the entry 3 times. The timeline was tight. From the time Cal turned away to answer the phone to the time he looked back, only 2 minutes had passed. In those 2 minutes, the boat had started, cast off, and pulled away from the dock. That was possible. Danny had done it hundreds of times. But if Danny was already dead by then, someone else had done it. She closed Cal's log and walked back to the harbor master's office. The automated log was still open on the desk. She looked at the signature again, the traced D, the uneven pressure, the way the rest of the letters flowed too smoothly, as if the forger had been practicing. She made a note. Check whose handwriting matches the traced signature. Then she locked the office and walked to the dock. The water was calm, the fog was burning off, and in the distance, near the mouth of the harbor, she saw a boat. It was bobbing at anchor, not moving, not tied to a mooring, just sitting there, alone in the middle of the channel. Nora pulled out her phone and called Cal Finney. Cal, there's a boat in the channel, just past the breakwater. Can you see it from your place? A pause, then, that's Danny's boat. Are you sure? I'd know it anywhere. Blue hull, white trim, red buoy hanging from the wheelhouse. That's the Coil boat. Nora hung up and called the Coast Guard station in Rockland. They said they would send a boat within the hour. She did not have an hour. She walked to the end of the dock and untied a small skiff that belonged to the harbor master's office. The engine started on the third pull. She pointed the bow toward the channel and pushed the throttle forward. The fog parted around her as she motored out of the harbor. The water was cold and gray, and the wind picked up as she cleared the breakwater. Danny's boat was 200 yards ahead, rocking gently on the swell. She pulled alongside and cut the engine. The boat was empty. No one on deck. No one in the wheelhouse. The mooring pin that should have been secured to the starboard cleat was missing. Nora tied the skiff to Danny's boat and climbed aboard. The deck was wet. The wheelhouse door was open. Inside, she found Danny's gear, his gloves, his lunch cooler, his rain jacket. Everything was in place, as if he had stepped away for a moment and never come back. But on the floor of the wheelhouse, near the helm, there was a smear of blood, dark brown, dry. Nora knelt and looked at it. The smear was small, about the size of her palm, and it was concentrated near the base of the wheel. She took a photograph with her phone. Then she looked at the helm. The key was in the ignition. The fuel gauge read half full. The engine was cold. She stepped back onto the deck and looked at the cleat where the mooring pin should have been. The metal was scratched, and there were small flecks of something dark caught in the scratches. Blood, maybe, or paint. She took another photograph. The Coast Guard arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers in orange life vests boarded Danny's boat and began their own assessment. Nora stood on the deck of the skiff and watched. "We'll tow it back to the harbor," one of them said. "Forensics can go over it there." Nora nodded. "I need the wheelhouse preserved. There's blood near the helm." The officer wrote something on a clipboard. She motored back to the dock, her mind turning over what she had seen. The boat had been anchored in the channel, not tied to anything, not drifting. Someone had placed it there deliberately. Someone who knew how to handle a boat. Someone who knew the harbor well enough to drop anchor in a spot where the Coast Guard would not find it immediately. Someone with a limp. She tied the skiff to the dock and walked to the harbor master's office. The automated log was still open on the desk. She sat down and stared at Danny's signature. The traced D, the uneven pressure, the too smooth flow of the letters. She thought about the 3 people she had interviewed. Ray Gillis was a fisherman. He knew boats, he knew the harbor, he owed Danny money, and he had been lying about something. But Ray did not have a limp, and the person Cal saw had a limp. P. Coyle was a fisherman. He knew boats, he knew the harbor. He had a legal case against Danny and a motive that went back years. But Pete did not have a limp, and the person Cal saw had a limp. Marta Chen was not a fisherman. She might not know how to handle a boat. She had no visible connection to the harbor. She had argued with Danny, and she had a secret, the half-sister story, that explained her presence in Stillwater Cove. But Marta did not have a limp, and the person Cal saw had a limp. Nora closed her eyes. She was missing someone. Someone who had been on the dock that night. Someone who had a reason to want Danny dead. Someone with a slight limp, either from an old injury or a new one. She opened her eyes and looked at the window. The fog was gone now, and the sun was bright on the water. The Coast Guard was towing Danny's boat into the harbor, and a small crowd had gathered on the dock to watch. Nora stood up and walked outside. Cal Finney was standing near the gate, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. "Cal," she said, "the person you saw on the dock, the one with the limp, did you see their face?" "No. It was too dark and the fog was thick." "Did you see anything else? Anything at all?" Cal was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Their boots. They were wearing boots, not fishing boots, deck boots, like the ones Danny wore, but newer. The soles were clean." Nora wrote it down. "Anything else?" "They walked like they knew the dock, like they'd been there before. No hesitation, no stumbling. So it was someone who knows the harbor, someone who knows it well." Nora looked at the crowd on the dock, fishermen, tourists, locals. Any one of them could be hiding something. Any one of them could have a limp. She walked back to her cruiser and sat in the driver's seat. Her phone buzzed. Gannett. "Selectmen's meeting in an hour," he said. "You ready?" "No." "Well, get ready. They're not going to wait." She hung up and started the engine. The boat was back. The blood was in the wheelhouse. The signature was traced. She had more questions than answers, and the clock was running. Nora drove to the station. She had a briefing to give, and after that, she had a killer to find. Chapter 6. The Selectmen's Patience. The Selectmen's meeting took place in the town hall, a brick building on Main Street that smelled of floor wax and old paper. Nora arrived at 4:50, which was 10 minutes early, and found Gannett already seated at the conference table with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers he was not reading. 3 selectmen sat across from them. Harriet Baines, the town clerk, was there too, taking notes in a leather-bound book. The room was warm and close, and Nora regretted wearing her jacket. "Deputy Alcott," said the chair. A man named Paul Voss, who owned the hardware store and had been on the board for 12 years. "We understand you've made progress on the Coyle matter." Nora sat down. Gannett did not introduce her. He did not look at her. He was waiting to see which way the wind blew. "We've recovered Danny Coyle's boat," Nora said. "It was anchored in the channel, just past the breakwater. The wheelhouse contains evidence that suggests he was killed on board and then moved to the Seabird Inn parking lot." Paul Voss frowned. "Moved? Why would the killer move the body?" "To confuse the timeline. The automated harbor log shows Danny's boat leaving at 4:17, but we have a witness who saw Danny alive on the dock at 4:45. Someone signed Danny out early to create an alibi." The other 2 selectmen exchanged glances. One of them, a woman named Linda Shore, who ran the real estate office, leaned forward. "Who is the witness?" "Cal Finney." Linda Shore sat back. Cal Finney was respected in Stillwater Cove. His word carried weight. "What about suspects?" Paul Voss asked. Nora opened her notebook. "We have 3 persons of interest. Ray Gillis, who owed Danny a significant amount of money. Pete Coyle, Danny's uncle, who has a long-standing dispute over a boat deed. And Marta Chen, a diner employee who recently learned she is Danny's half-sister." "Half-sister?" Linda Shore looked surprised. "I've known the Coyles my whole life. There was never any mention of another child." "That's because the family kept it quiet. Marta Chen came to Stillwater Cove specifically to find Danny. She confronted him 2 days before his death. Paul Voss tapped his fingers on the table. Do any of these people have alibis? None that we've confirmed. So you have 3 suspects, no alibis, and no clear motive. Nora kept her voice steady. We have motives. Ray Gillis was about to lose his boat. Pete Coyle was building a legal case that Danny had defrauded him. Marta Chen had been erased from her father's will. All 3 had reasons to want Danny dead. But no evidence, Paul Voss said. Not yet. The room was quiet. Gannett cleared his throat. The deputy is doing her job, he said. These things take time. Time is something we don't have, Linda Shore said. Lobster season is underway. The tourists are coming. If word gets out that a killer is loose in Stillwater Cove, people will stay away. Nora looked at her. A man is dead. Mrs. Shore, the tourists will manage. Linda Shore's face tightened, but she did not reply. Paul Voss stood up. We expect regular updates, Deputy, and we expect this matter to be resolved quickly. Dismissed. Nora stood and walked out. Gannett followed her into the hallway. You could have been more diplomatic, he said. They wanted me to tell them it was an accident. They wanted you to tell them something they could repeat to the press. Nora stopped walking. Roy, someone killed Danny Coyle. Someone carried his body across a parking lot and left it under a tarp. That's not an accident. And no amount of diplomatic language will make it one. Gannett sighed. I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to be careful. I'm always careful. She walked out of the town hall and into the late afternoon light. The sun was low and the shadows were long. She stood on the steps for a moment, breathing the salt air. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I know who killed Danny. Meet me at the breakwater at 8. Come alone. Nora stared at the screen. The breakwater was the pub on the harbor side, run by Vera Stout. It was a locals-only place, dark and loud. And it was not the kind of place where people sent anonymous texts. She typed back. Who is this? No response. She tried calling. The number went straight to voicemail. Nora walked to her cruiser and sat in the driver's seat. The text could be a trap. It could be a prank. It could be someone who genuinely knew something and was too scared to say it openly. She decided to go. The breakwater opened at 6, but the crowd did not arrive until 8. Nora parked on the street and walked to the door. The pub was half empty. Vera Stout was behind the bar, polishing glasses with a rag that had seen better days. Nora, Vera said. Didn't expect to see you here. Meeting someone? Vera raised an eyebrow, but did not ask. She pointed to a booth in the back. You want something to drink? Coffee. Vera nodded and walked away. Nora sat in the booth and waited. The clock on the wall said 8:03. The door opened. A man walked in. He was tall, thin, wearing a gray coat. Nora's hand went to her hip. She was not carrying her service weapon. She had left it in the cruiser because the breakwater was supposed to be safe. The man walked to her booth and sat down across from her. Deputy Alcott, he said. Who are you? My name is Frank Moretti. I'm a retired detective. From Augusta. Nora did not relax. You sent the text. I did. I know who killed Danny Coyle. Then tell me. Frank Moretti leaned back. His face was lined and tired, but his eyes were sharp. Not yet. First, I need to know you're willing to listen. I'm listening. I worked a case in the 90s. A man was convicted based on a traced signature. Sound familiar? Nora's pulse quickened. Go on. The signature looked perfect. The expert said it was authentic. But the defense attorney brought in a document examiner who noticed something small. The pressure on the first stroke was wrong. The person who traced it had started too carefully, then pressed harder as they went. "That's what I saw," Nora said. "On the harbor log, the D—" Frank nodded. "Whoever signed Danny's name had access to a document with his signature. And they knew the log well enough to know a trace signature would pass." "Who was it?" Frank looked at the door. The pub was filling up now, and the noise was rising. He lowered his voice. "I've been in Stillwater Cove for 3 days. I came up to see an old friend, but when I heard about Danny Coyle, I started asking questions. Quiet questions. The kind that don't make it back to the people who run this town. And I found out something interesting. The harbor log isn't the only thing that was tampered with. The gate lock was picked, not left open. Cal Finney's key works fine, but someone used a tool to open it without leaving marks. A locksmith? Someone who knows locks. Someone who learned how to pick them." Nora thought about the 3 suspects. Ray Gillis was a fisherman. Pete Coyle was a fisherman. Marta Chen was a diner worker. None of them had training in locks. "Who?" she asked again. Frank stood up. "I'll tell you tomorrow. Same time, same place. But I need to verify one more thing first." He walked to the door and disappeared into the night. Nora sat in the booth for a long time. Vera brought her coffee. She drank it without tasting it. Frank Moretti knew something. He knew who had traced the signature. He knew who had picked the lock. But he was not ready to tell her yet. She left the pub at 9 and walked to her cruiser. The harbor was dark, the water black and still. She stood by the railing and looked out at the channel. Danny's boat was tied to the dock now, covered in tarps, waiting for the forensics team to finish their work. The blood in the wheelhouse, the missing mooring pin, the traced signature. Someone had planned this. Someone who knew the harbor, knew the locks, knew how to handle a boat, and knew how to forge a signature. Someone with a limp. Nora got into her cruiser and drove home. Beckett was on the armchair, not the rug. He looked at her and blinked once. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and opened her notebook. She wrote one word. Who? Then she closed her eyes and tried to think like a killer. Chapter 7. The Crack. Nora did not sleep well. She lay awake in the dark, going over the timeline again and again. And when she finally drifted off, she dreamed of signatures. Loops and slants, pen pressure and traced lines. She woke at 4 in the morning with her heart racing and the taste of salt on her tongue. Beckett was on the foot of the bed, which was unusual. He did not generally approve of sleeping in the same room. But there he was, a warm weight against her ankles, purring low and steady. She lay still for a moment and let the purr settle her. Then she got up and made coffee. The harbor was quiet at 5. The fog was back, thicker than before, and the water was invisible from the dock. Nora parked near the gate and walked to the harbor master's office. The automated log was still on the desk. She opened it to the previous day's entries and looked at Danny's signature again. The traced D, the uneven pressure, the too smooth flow. She took out her phone and compared it to the receipt from the diner. Side by side, the difference was clearer now. The forger had tried too hard. They had made the signature look exactly like the original, but in doing so, they had lost something. A natural variation, a slight tremor, the small imperfections that made a signature real. She closed the log and walked outside. Cal Finney was already at the dock, checking his lines. He looked up when she approached. Morning, Deputy. Cal, the person you saw on the dock? The one with the limp? Did you notice anything about their hands? Cal frowned. Their hands. Were they wearing gloves? Were they holding anything? He thought about it. No gloves. I would have remembered that. And they weren't holding anything when I first saw them. Just standing there, talking to Danny. What about when they left? I didn't see them leave. I turned away to answer the phone. Nora nodded. She had asked this before. She was asking it again because she was looking for something she might have missed, some small detail that would crack the case open. Thank you. Cal. She walked back to her cruiser and sat in the driver's seat. Frank Moretti had said he would meet her at the breakwater at 8. That was 14 hours away. She did not want to wait that long. She called the number he had texted from. Voicemail, again. She tried information. Looking for a Frank Moretti in Augusta, there were 3. She called all of them. None answered. Nora drove to the diner. Iris was behind the counter, flipping pancakes on the griddle. The breakfast rush was just beginning, and the booths were filling up with fishermen and contractors and early morning tourists. Booth in the back, Iris said without looking up. Coffee's on its way. Nora slid into the booth and waited. Iris came over with a pot and a mug. You look terrible, Iris said. Thanks. Did you sleep? Not much. Iris poured the coffee and sat down across from her. This was becoming a pattern. Iris sitting when she should be working, taking time she could not afford. It meant she was worried. What did you find on the boat? Iris asked. Blood, a missing mooring pin, and a timeline that doesn't work. Whose timeline? The automated log. Someone signed Danny out at 4:17, but Cal saw him alive at 4:45, so whoever signed the log was not Danny. Iris was quiet for a moment. That means someone else took the boat out, or they started the engine and let it drift. But yes, someone else was on that boat. And you think that person killed Danny? Nora nodded. On the boat. Then they brought the body back to the dock and carried it to the inn's parking lot. That's a lot of work for one person. It is. Which means they're strong, they know the harbor, and they were desperate. Iris looked out the window. The harbor was visible through the glass, gray and flat. Have you talked to Ray again? He's lying about something, but I don't think he's a killer. Pete? Same. Marta? Nora hesitated. She has the strongest motive, being erased from a will. Being told no one would believe her, that's a wound that doesn't heal. But she doesn't have a limp, and she doesn't know boats. Are you sure about that? Nora frowned. What do you mean? Iris leaned forward. Marta's been here for 14 months. She works at the diner, yes. But she also volunteers at the harbor on weekends, helps Cal with the logs, cleans the bait shed. She's been learning. Nora's pulse quickened. Learning what? How to handle a boat. How to read the tide charts. How to pick a lock. Nora stared at her. Pick a lock? I saw her at the dock last month. The lock on the gate was stuck, and Cal was having trouble with it. Marta took a tool out of her pocket, a small metal thing, like a pick, and opened it in 5 seconds. Cal laughed and said she was wasted at the diner. Nora reached for her notebook. Why didn't anyone tell me this? Because no one thought it mattered. Marta's a nice girl, quiet, helpful. People like her. People liked Danny too, or they pretended to. Iris stood up. I'm not saying Marta killed him. I'm saying you should talk to her again. Ask her about the lock. Nora finished her coffee and left the diner. The morning was warming up, and the fog was starting to burn off. She drove to Main Street and parked outside the hardware store. The stairs to Marta's apartment were narrow and steep. She climbed them slowly, thinking about limps and locks and trace signatures. She knocked on the blue door. No answer. She knocked again. Marta, it's Deputy Alcott. I need to talk to you. Silence. Nora tried the door. It was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment was empty. The bed was made. The table was clear. The bookshelf was still full of paperbacks. But the hot plate was cold, and the window was open, and a faint breeze was moving the curtains. On the table, in the center, there was a single piece of paper. Nora walked over and picked it up. It was a handwritten note. The handwriting was neat and precise, the letters evenly spaced. Deputy Alcott, I didn't kill Danny, but I know who did. I can't tell you here. Someone is watching. Meet me at the lighthouse at noon. Come alone. M. Nora folded the note and put it in her pocket. She looked around the apartment one more time. The window faced the harbor. From here, she could see the dock, the gate, the parking lot of the Seabird Inn. Marta had been watching. Maybe for a long time. Nora walked back down the stairs and stood on the sidewalk. The clock on the hardware store said 9:45. She had 2 hours and 15 minutes until noon. She drove to the station. Gannett was at his desk, reading a fishing magazine. He looked up when she walked in. You find something? Marta Chen is gone. Her apartment is empty. She left a note asking me to meet her at the lighthouse. Gannett put down the magazine. That sounds like a trap. It might be, but I'm going anyway. Take backup. She said to come alone. Gannett stood up. Nora, you can't just walk into, I can and I will. If she has information, I need it. If she's the killer, I need to know that too. Gannett stared at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down. Take your gun, he said. Nora nodded and walked out. The lighthouse was on the north point of the cove, a quarter-mile past the bluff. It had been decommissioned 20 years ago, but the tower was still standing and the keeper's cottage was still intact. No one lived there. It was a place for tourists during the day and teenagers at night. Nora parked at the trailhead and walked the rest of the way. The path was gravel and dirt, lined with wild roses that had not bloomed yet. The wind was strong this close to the water, and the waves were crashing against the rocks below. The lighthouse was white and round, with a black iron railing around the top. The door was wooden and weathered, hanging slightly open. Nora pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was dark and cold. The stairs to the top were metal and rusted. She could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. Marta? Her voice echoed off the stone. No answer. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand on the railing, her ears straining for any sound. The steps creaked under her weight. The wind grew louder as she climbed. At the top, the door to the gallery was open. She stepped out into the light. The view was spectacular. The harbor spread out below her, the boats like toys, the town like a model. She could see the dock, the inn, the diner, the station. But no Marta. She was alone. Nora stood at the railing and waited. The wind whipped her hair across her face. The waves crashed below. The sun was high and bright. Noon came and went. No Marta. Nora waited another 30 minutes. Then she walked back down the stairs and out of the lighthouse. The parking lot was empty. Her cruiser was the only car. She got in and sat there for a moment, her hands on the wheel. The note had said noon. Come alone. Marta had not shown up. Either she had been lying or someone had gotten to her first. Nora started the engine and drove back to town. She had a bad feeling in her gut, the kind she had learned to trust in Boston. Something was wrong. She called Marta's phone. Voicemail. She called the diner. Iris answered. Has Marta been in today?
No, I haven't seen her since yesterday.
Nora hung up and drove to the hardware store. The blue door to Marta's apartment was still unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The note was still on the table. The window was still open. Everything was the same. Except for one thing. On the floor, near the bed, there was a small smear of blood. Nora knelt and touched it. It was wet. She stood up and pulled out her phone. Roy, I need a forensics team at Marta Chen's apartment. And I need a search warrant for the harbor. What's going on? Marta's gone. There's blood on her floor. And I think I know who killed Danny Coyle. She hung up and walked out of the apartment. The afternoon sun was hot on her face, but her blood was cold. The gray coat, the limp, the traced signature, the picked lock, it all pointed to one person. A person she had interviewed. A person who had lied to her face. She got into her cruiser and drove toward the harbor. It was time to finish this. Chapter 8. What the safe contained. The harbor master's office was dark when Nora arrived. She had the key in her pocket, but she did not need it. The door was unlocked. Same as before. Same as it had been every time she had visited. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The smell was the same. Paper and salt and the faint sweetness of old cigarettes. She turned on the desk lamp and sat down. The automated log was still open to the previous day's entries. She looked at Danny's signature again. The traced D, the uneven pressure. Then she closed the log and opened the desk drawer. Inside she found pens, paper clips, a stapler, and a small metal box. The box was locked. She pulled it out and examined it. The lock was cheap, the kind that could be picked with a paper clip. She took a clip from the drawer, straightened it, and worked it into the lock. It took less than a minute to open. Inside the box, she found a stack of papers, bank statements, loan documents, and a photograph. The photograph showed two men standing in front of a boat. One was Danny Coyle. The other was older, gray-haired, with a slight limp that Nora recognized from the way he leaned on his right leg. She had seen that limp before. She had interviewed the man 2 days ago, and he had walked normally. No limp at all. Nora stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she picked up the bank statements. The account belonged to a person she had not suspected, a person who had been in the background of every interview, every scene, every moment of the investigation, a person who knew the harbor, knew the locks, knew how to handle a boat, and knew how to forge a signature. She put the photograph in her pocket and locked the box. Then she stood up and walked out of the harbor master's office. The sun was setting. The harbor was quiet. The boats were tied to the dock, their masts swaying gently in the evening breeze. Nora walked to the gate and looked out at the water. She thought about the night Danny died. The boat leaving at 4:17. The gray coat on the dock at 4:45. The body in the parking lot at 5:30. The traced signature. The picked lock. It had all been planned. Not perfectly, but well enough. Well enough to confuse the timeline. Well enough to point suspicion at 3 innocent people. But not well enough to fool Cal Finney. And not well enough to fool her. Nora walked back to her cruiser and called Gannett. Roy, I need you to meet me at the station. I know who killed Danny Coyle. Who? I'll tell you when you get here. She hung up and drove to the station. The building was dark except for the lights in her office. She sat at her desk and spread out the evidence, the photographs, the bank statements, the copy of Cal's handwritten log. Gannett arrived 20 minutes later. He looked tired and confused. What's this about? Nora handed him the photograph. Do you recognize the man standing next to Danny? Gannett looked at it. His face went pale. That's Magnus Torkel, the owner of the Seabird Inn. Gannett sat down heavily. Magnus? Why would Magnus kill Danny Coyle? Nora pulled out the bank statements. Because Magnus owed him money. A lot of money. More than Ray Gillis owed. More than anyone knew. She spread the statements across the desk. Magnus has been running the inn at a loss for years. He borrowed from Danny to cover the shortfall. The loans were informal, no contracts, no paperwork, just handshake agreements. But Danny kept records. He kept them in this box, in the harbor master's office. Why there? Because no one would think to look there. Danny and Magnus were friends, or they pretended to be. Magnus had access to the harbor master's office because he had a key, same as everyone else who worked on the dock. Gannett stared at the statements. How much did Magnus owe? $47,000, plus interest. Danny was going to call in the loan at the end of lobster season. And Magnus killed him to avoid paying? Magnus killed him because Danny had proof. Written proof. Magnus had signed a promissory note 6 months ago, agreeing to repay the full amount by October 1st. If Danny went public with that note, Magnus would lose the inn. The bank would foreclose. He would be ruined. Gannett rubbed his face. The limp. Magnus has a limp, an old injury from his fishing days. He usually hides it well, but Cal saw him on the dock that night. Magnus was favoring his right leg because he had hurt it carrying the body. How do you know he carried the body? The boots. Danny's boots were dry, no gravel dust, no scuff marks. Magnus carried him from the dock to the parking lot. It's a distance of 50 yards, not far for a man who's desperate. Gannett was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What about the signature, the traced signature on the logbook? Magnus had access to Danny's signature. Danny signed receipts at the inn, room charges, bar tabs, restaurant bills. Magnus had plenty of opportunities to practice. And the lockbook. Magnus has a key. He didn't need to pick it. He just unlocked the gate, carried the body through, and locked it again. The open gate Cal found was a mistake. Magnus forgot to lock it on his second trip book. Gannett stood up. We need to bring him in. Not yet. There's something else. Nora pulled out the note from Marta Chen's apartment, the one that had said, Meet me at the lighthouse at noon. I think Magnus has Marta, she said. She knew something. She was going to tell me, and he found out. Gannett's face tightened. You think he hurt her? I think she's alive. Magnus is smart. He wouldn't kill 2 people. 1 murder he can explain. 2 looks like a pattern. Where is she? Nora stood up. I have an idea, but I need you to trust me. Gannett looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Whatever you need. Nora walked to the door. I need you to stay here. Don't call Magnus. Don't warn him. Just wait. Wait for what? For me to bring him in. She walked out of the station and into the night. The harbor was dark, the water black and still. She drove to the Seabird Inn and parked in the lot, the same lot where Danny Coyle's body had been found. The inn was quiet. The lights were on in the lobby, but the windows were dark. Nora walked to the front door and tried the handle. It was unlocked. She stepped inside. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and old wood. The desk was empty. A single lamp burned on the counter, casting a pool of yellow light across the registration book. Magnus, she called. Silence. She walked to the back of the lobby, past the stairs, past the dining room, to a door that led to the basement. The door was closed. She tried the handle. Locked. She knelt and looked at the lock. It was new, a deadbolt, installed recently. The metal was shiny, the screws fresh. Nora stood up and knocked. Magnus, I know you're in there. I know about the money. I know about Danny. Silence. I know about Marta, too. She's in there with you, isn't she? Still silence. But she heard something. A muffled sound, like a voice trying to speak through a gag. Nora stepped back and kicked the door. The wood splintered around the lock, but the door did not open. She kicked it again. This time the frame gave way. The basement was dark and cold. The air smelled of damp concrete and old wine. Nora felt along the wall for a light switch and found one. The light revealed a room filled with storage racks, boxes, and wine bottles. And in the corner, tied to a chair, was Marta Chen. Her mouth was covered with duct tape. Her hands were bound behind her back. Her eyes were wide and frightened, but she was alive. Nora crossed the room and tore the tape from Marta's mouth. "He's here," Marta whispered. "He's in the back. He has a knife." Nora turned. Magnus Torkel stepped out from behind a rack of wine bottles. His face was pale, his eyes flat. In his right hand, he held a mooring pin, the same kind that had killed Danny Coyle. "Deputy Alcott," he said, "I was hoping you wouldn't find her. Put the pin down. Magnus," he shook his head. "You don't understand. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Danny was my friend, but he was going to ruin me. So you killed him. He gave me no choice." Nora took a step forward. Magnus raised the pin. "Don't," he said. "Magnus, this is over. The police are on their way. If you put the pin down now, it will go easier for you." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Nothing is going to go easier for me. I killed a man. I'm going to prison for the rest of my life." "Maybe, but if you hurt Marta, it will be worse." Magnus looked at Marta. His hand trembled. The pin wavered. "Please," Marta said. Her voice was small and raw. "Please, don't." For a long moment, no one moved. The basement was silent, except for the sound of Magnus's breathing, fast, shallow, desperate. Then he lowered the pin. Nora stepped forward and took it from his hand. She pulled out her handcuffs and secured his wrists behind his back. "Magnus Torkel, you are under arrest for the murder of Danny Coyle." He did not resist. He did not speak. He simply stood there, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Nora untied Marta and helped her to her feet. "Are you okay?" Marta nodded. Tears were streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have told you sooner. I knew about the money. I saw Magnus take the boat out that night. I was on the dock, watching. I was going to tell you at the lighthouse, but he found me first." "It's okay," Nora said. "You're safe now." She led Marta up the stairs and out of the basement. Gannett was waiting in the lobby, his gun drawn, his face grim. "Magnus is in the basement," Nora said. "Get him out of here." Gannett nodded and disappeared through the door. Nora walked Marta to the cruiser and helped her into the passenger seat. Then she stood in the parking lot and looked up at the sky. The stars were out. The harbor was quiet. And somewhere out on the water, Danny Coyle's boat was still tied to the dock, waiting for the forensics team to finish their work. She had found the killer. She had saved Marta. And she had done it alone, just like she always did. But for the first time in a long time, she did not feel alone. She thought about Frank Moretti, the retired detective from Augusta. He had given her the clue she needed, the traced signature, the pressure on the first stroke. She would have figured it out eventually, but he had saved her days of dead ends. She thought about Iris with him, who had seen Marta for who she really was. About Cal, who had kept the handwritten log that broke the case open. About Dot, who would have found the will if she had asked. She thought about Beckett waiting for her at home, sitting on the tide chart, indifferent to everything except the warmth of the cottage. Nora got into the cruiser and started the engine. She had a report to write, a killer to process, and a cat who needed to be fed. Tomorrow she would start again, but tonight she would sleep. Chapter 9. Certainty. The station was quiet at midnight. Gannett had gone home an hour ago. After Magnus was booked and processed and locked in the holding cell, the cell was small and drafty, same as the rest of the building, and Magnus had not asked for anything. He had simply sat on the bench with his head in his hands and stared at the floor. Nora sat at her desk with a cup of cold coffee and a stack of paperwork. The arrest report was half finished. The evidence log was open on her laptop. The photographs from the harbor master's office were spread across her desk. The bank statements, the promissory note, the photograph of Magnus and Danny standing in front of the boat. She had been looking at that photograph for an hour. Danny was smiling. Magnus was smiling too, his arm around Danny's shoulders, his weight on his left leg. The limp was visible if you knew what to look for. The slight tilt of his hips, the way his right foot barely touched the ground. The photograph was dated 6 years ago. Before the loans, before the debt, before everything fell apart. Nora wondered when Magnus had stopped being Danny's friend and started being his debtor. She wondered if there had been a single moment, a bad season at the inn, a repair that cost too much, a loan that seemed small at the time, or if it had been a slow slide, year by year, until the weight became unbearable. She would never know. Magnus was not talking. Her phone buzzed, a text from Frank Moretti. "Heard you made the arrest. Good work, F." She stared at the screen for a moment. Then she typed back, "You knew it was Magnus. Why didn't you just tell me?" The reply came a minute later. "Because you needed to see it yourself. A case you're handed is a case you doubt. A case you build is a case you believe." Nora set the phone down and leaned back in her chair. He was right. She hated that he was right, but he was. If Frank had given her Magnus's name on that first night at the breakwater, she would have followed the lead. But she would have wondered. She would have questioned whether she was being manipulated, whether Frank had his own reasons for pointing her in a certain direction. Instead, she had found the evidence herself. She had seen the photograph. She had matched the limp. She had traced the signature with her own eyes. There was no doubt now. There would never be doubt. She finished the arrest report and signed it. Then she walked to the holding cell. Magnus looked up when she approached. His face was hollow, his eyes red. "Deputy," he said. "Magnus, do you want to call a lawyer?" He shook his head. "What's the point?" "The point is that you have rights, even now." "I waived my rights when I picked up that mooring pin." Nora leaned against the wall. The cell was cold, and the light was fluorescent and harsh. Magnus looked smaller than he had in the basement, diminished, almost fragile. "Why, Magnus?" He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The inn was my father's. He built it from nothing. When he died, he left it to me, and I promised myself I would never lose it." "But you were losing it." "Slowly, year by year. The tourists stopped coming in the summer. The winters were longer. I took out loans to cover the gap, but the interest ate up everything. And Danny was my friend. He offered to help. Small loans at first. No interest, just a handshake. But then the inn needed a new roof. And then the furnace went. And then there was the storm that took out the porch. Magnus's voice cracked. He swallowed hard. I kept borrowing. Danny kept lending. And every time the terms got worse, the interest got higher, the deadlines got shorter. Until you owed him $47,000. 47,000. Magnus laughed, a bitter, broken sound. I don't have 47,000. I don't have 4,000. The inn is worth less than the debt. So you killed him. I killed him because he was going to take the inn. He said he would call in the loan at the end of lobster season. If I couldn't pay, he would take the property as collateral. Could he do that? Magnus looked at her. His eyes were wet. He had a promissory note. I signed it 6 months ago. I was desperate, and he knew it. The note gave him the right to seize the inn if I defaulted. Nora thought about the bank statements. The promissory note was in the metal box, along with the photograph and the loan documents. Danny had kept everything. He had known exactly what he was doing. Did you plan to kill him? She asked. Magnus shook his head. I planned to talk to him, to beg him for more time. I went to the dock at 4 a.m. because I knew he would be there alone. But you brought the mooring pin. I brought the mooring pin because I was afraid, not of him, of myself. I knew what I might do if he said no. And he said no. He laughed. He said I had until October 1st, and then the inn was his. He said he was going to turn it into a condominium complex for summer tourists. Magnus's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his knees. I don't remember picking up the pit. I don't remember swinging it. I just remember him falling, and then there was blood, and he wasn't moving, and I knew I had killed him. Nora waited. I put him in the boat. I didn't know what else to do. I started the engine and drove out to the channel. I was going to dump him overboard. But I couldn't. I couldn't do that to him. So I brought him back. You carried him to the parking lot. I carried him to the parking lot and left him there. I thought if I left him somewhere public, someone would find him quickly. I didn't want him to be alone. Nora said nothing. The signature on the log, Magnus continued. I traced it from a receipt he'd signed at the inn. I practiced for a week. I thought if the log showed the boat leaving at 4:17, no one would look for him at the dock. But Cal Finney saw you. Cal saw a man in a gray coat. He didn't see my face. I thought I was safe. You almost were. Magnus looked at her. Are you going to tell me that doesn't matter? That almost doesn't count? It counts, Nora said. But it doesn't change what you did. She pushed away from the wall and walked back to her desk. Magnus did not call after her. He did not say another word. Nora sat down and stared at the photograph of Danny and Magnus, 2 men who had been friends, 2 men who had trusted each other, 2 men who had let money come between them until there was nothing left but blood and debt. She put the photograph in the evidence envelope and sealed it. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she always called when a case was finished. Dot Fenwick answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was scratchy with sleep. Nora, it's midnight. I know. I'm sorry. Did you find him? I found him. It was Magnus Torkel. A long pause. Dot was not a woman who expressed surprise easily, but Nora could hear it in the silence. The innkeeper, yes? Will you tell me why tomorrow? I'll tell you everything tomorrow. I just needed to hear a voice that wasn't... She stopped. She did not know how to finish the sentence. Dot understood anyway. Come to the library at 9, she said. I'll put the kettle on. Thank you. Dot. Nora hung up and sat in the silence. The station was empty. The holding cell was quiet. Somewhere in the back room, The old refrigerator hummed its uneven song. She thought about Marta Chen, alone in her apartment above the hardware store, trying to sleep after what she had seen and heard. She thought about Ray Gillis, still hiding his embezzlement, still terrified that someone would find out. She thought about Pete Coyle, sitting on his porch with his lemonade and his legal case, finally free of the nephew who had stolen his birthright. None of them had killed Danny Coyle, but all of them had wanted something from him. All of them had been willing to lie, to hide, to manipulate. And in the end, it was Magnus, the quiet one, the formal one, the man who kept everyone's secrets, who had done the thing that could not be undone. Nora locked her desk and walked to the holding cell one last time. Magnus, the state police will be here in the morning to transfer you to Rockland. Do you need anything before then? He looked up. His face was wet. A glass of water, he said. She brought him a cup from the break room. He took it with both hands and drank it slowly, like a man who had been in the desert for a very long time. Thank you, Deputy. Try to get some sleep. She turned off the lights in the station and walked outside. The air was cold and clean, and the stars were bright overhead. The harbor was dark, the water black and still. Nora got into her cruiser and drove home. The cottage was dark. Beckett was on the armchair, not the table, and he did not acknowledge her arrival. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe. Then she went to the kitchen and made tea. She did not turn on the light. She sat in the dark with her hands wrapped around the warm mug and thought about the case. The traced signature, the picked lock, the gray coat, the limp. She had solved it. She had found the killer. She had saved Marta, but she did not feel victorious. She felt tired and sad and older than she had been 5 days ago. Tomorrow, she would write the final report. She would testify at the preliminary hearing. She would answer the selectmen's questions and absorb Gannett's complaints and move on to the next case. But tonight, she would sit in the dark with her tea and her cat and let the silence settle around her like a blanket. Nora finished her tea and went to bed. Beckett did not follow. She fell asleep with the taste of coffee on her tongue and the image of a photograph in her mind. 2 men, standing in front of a boat. She wondered if Magnus would ever smile again. She doubted it. Chapter 10. No Stone at the Seabird. The morning was gray and cold. Nora woke before the alarm, dressed in the dark, and drove to the station without stopping for coffee. The holding cell was empty. Magnus had been transferred to Rockland at 6, processed by the state police, and booked into the county jail. His lawyer had already filed a motion. His bail hearing was scheduled for Monday. Nora sat at her desk and finished the paperwork. The final report was 12 pages long, single-spaced, with attachments that included the photographs, the bank statements, and Cal Finney's handwritten log. She printed 2 copies, one for Gannett, one for the district attorney, and placed them in a manila folder. Then she walked to the diner. Iris was behind the counter, pouring coffee for a fisherman named Sid Calder. The breakfast rush was over, and the lunch crowd had not yet arrived. The diner was quiet, almost peaceful. Nora slid into her usual booth. Iris came over with a pot and a mug. "You look like you slept," Iris said. "I did. A little." "Heard about Magnus. The whole town is talking." "I figured." Iris sat down across from her. "Was it really over money?" "It was over money and fear and a promissory note that Danny was going to use to take the inn." Iris shook her head. "I've known Magnus for 20 years. He never seemed like the type. No one ever does." Iris was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up. Breakfast is on the house today. You earned it. Nora ate her eggs and toast without tasting them. Her mind was still on the case, on the timeline, on the evidence, on the small details that had made the difference. The traced signature, the limp, the lock. She finished her coffee and left the diner. Her next stop was the library. Bellamy Library was a stone building on the north end of Main Street, built in 1891, with stained glass windows and a hush that settled over you the moment you walked through the door. Dot Fenwick was at the circulation desk, her white hair pinned up, her glasses perched on her nose. 9 o'clock, Dot said. You're late. I'm sorry. I kept the kettle on. Nora followed her to the back room, a small office filled with books and papers and the smell of old leather. Dot poured 2 cups of tea and sat down behind her desk. Tell me, she said. Nora told her. Everything. The automated log, the traced signature, Cal's handwritten notes, the interview with Ray, with Pete, with Marta, the text from Frank Moretti, the photograph in the metal box, the basement of the Seabird Inn. Dot listened without interrupting. When Nora finished, she took off her glasses and cleaned them with a cloth. Magnus Torkel, she said. I would not have guessed. Neither would I. Not at first. But the evidence was there. It was there. I just had to see it. Dot nodded. She put her glasses back on and looked at Nora over the rims. You did good work, Nora. Hard work. The kind that matters. Thank you. Dot. Now drink your tea before it gets cold. Nora drank her tea. It was strong and sweet, the way Dot always made it, and it warmed her in a way that coffee never could. After the library, she drove to the harbor. Cal Finney was at the dock, checking his lines. Same as every morning. He looked up when she approached. Deputy, heard you caught him. Magnus confessed last night. Cal nodded slowly. I should have known. The limp, the gray coat. I should have put it together. You gave me everything I needed. Cal, the handwritten log, the timeline, the description. Without you, I would have spent weeks chasing the wrong people. Cal looked out at the water. Danny was no saint, but he didn't deserve to die like that. No one does. Cal was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What happens to the inn now? I don't know. Magnus's lawyer will handle it. The bank might seize it, or a family member might step in. It's a shame. The inn has been part of this town for a long time. Yes, Nora said. It has. She left Cal at the dock and walked to the Seabird Inn. The building was dark, the windows empty, the parking lot deserted. A single sign hung on the front door, closed until further notice. Nora stood on the porch and looked out at the harbor. The water was gray and calm. The boats were moving slowly, their engines low and steady. The gulls were crying overhead. She thought about Magnus, sitting in his cell in Rockland, waiting for his bail hearing. She thought about Danny, lying on a cold table at the medical examiner's office, waiting to be buried. She thought about Marta, alone in her apartment above the hardware store, waiting for her life to start over. The case was closed, but the wounds would take a long time to heal. Nora walked back to her cruiser and drove home. The cottage was warm. Beckett was on the kitchen table, sitting on the tide chart, his tail wrapped around his paws. He looked at her with his large, unimpressed eyes and blinked once. Nora sat down across from him. I solved it, she said. Beckett did not react. The killer was Magnus Torkel, the innkeeper. He owed Danny money, a lot of money, and when Danny threatened to take the inn, Magnus killed him. Beckett yawned. I know you don't care, but I needed to say it out loud. Beckett stood up. turned in a circle, and lay back down on the tide chart. He closed his eyes. Nora laughed. It was a small sound, quiet and surprised, and it felt good in a way she had not expected. She made tea and sat in the armchair by the window. The afternoon light was pale and thin, and the harbor was visible in the distance, a gray stripe between the bluffs. She thought about Frank Moretti. She had not seen him since the night at the breakwater. She did not know if he was still in town or if he had gone back to Augusta. But she owed him something, a thank you at least. He had given her the clue she needed. And he had done it without asking for credit or recognition. She thought about Marta Chen, the half-sister who had come to Stillwater Cove, looking for family and found only rejection and violence. Nora hoped she would stay. The town needed people like Marta, quiet, determined, willing to fight for what was theirs. She thought about Ray Gillis, still hiding his embezzlement, still terrified of exposure. She would have to deal with him eventually, but not today. She thought about Pete Coyle, sitting on his porch with his lemonade and his legal case, finally free of the nephew who had stolen his birthright. She hoped he found peace. Nora finished her tea and set the mug on the floor. Beckett opened one eye, saw that she was not moving, and closed it again. The afternoon stretched out before her, quiet and empty. She had no interviews to conduct, no evidence to process, no suspects to chase. The case was over. She picked up her phone and called Frank Moretti. He answered on the second ring. "Deputy Alcott?" "Frank, I wanted to thank you for the tip about the signature, for pointing me in the right direction." "You would have figured it out on your own." "Maybe, but you saved me time." There was a pause. When Frank spoke again, his voice was softer. "You did good work, Nora. The kind of work that matters." "That's what Dot said." "Dot is a smart woman." "She is." Another pause, then Frank said, "I'm heading back to Augusta tomorrow, but if you ever need anything, a second set of eyes, a sounding board, you have my number." "I do. Thank you, Frank." "Take care of yourself, Deputy." He hung up. Nora set the phone down and looked out the window. The sun was setting, and the harbor was turning gold. The boats were coming in, one by one, their lights winking on in the twilight. She thought about the title of the case, No Stone at the Seabird. It had seemed like a strange name at first, abstract, almost literary. But now she understood. The Seabird Inn was a place where secrets were kept. Magnus had kept everyone's secrets for 30 years, and in the end, it was his own secret. The debt, the fear, the violence that destroyed him. No stone at the Seabird, no place to hide, no shelter from the truth. Nora stood up and stretched. Beckett opened both eyes. "I'm going to bed," she said. Beckett did not move. She walked to the bedroom and lay down in the dark. The sheets were cold, and the pillow was flat, and the sound of the harbor was a low murmur through the window. She closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her. Tomorrow, she would start again. There would be another case, another victim, another killer to find. That was the job. That was always the job. But tonight, she would rest. And somewhere in the dark, the tide would come in, and the secrets would stay buried, at least until the next time. That's all from Stillwater Cove for tonight. Nora will be back soon. Until then, stay curious and stay warm. Some debts are paid in money, and some are paid in blood. And Magnus Torkel learned too late that the second kind never lets you go.